We're watching Press TV's News Review, where we look deeper into some of the top stories of the day. On this segment of the program, the Pentagon denies media reports that the United States helped Ukraine hit and sink a Russian missile cruiser last month. The Pentagon spokesman says Washington didn't provide Ukraine with, quote, specific targeting information for the Moskva. John Kirby said the U.S. had no prior knowledge of Ukraine's plan to hit the flagship of Russia's Black Sea Fleet with missiles. He said the attack was carried out with Ukraine's own intelligence capabilities. Media reports recently quoted American officials as saying the U.S. had provided Kiev with intelligence about the location of Moskva. Russia earlier blamed a fire on board the vessel for the sinking. Over the past weeks, the U.S. has sought to restrict knowledge of the full extent of its aid to Ukraine in an attempt to avert direct confrontation with Russia. The Pentagon has also denied reports that Washington has been providing Ukraine with intelligence about the locations of Russian generals on the battlefield. Joining us on this edition of the News Review, we have author and commentator John Stepling joining us from Inderøy, Norway. Also, we have political commentator Frank Emspak joining us from Madison. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Let's start off with Mr. Stepling in Norway. I want to get your overall perspective on not just the issue with the sinking of the Moskva, but also a few days prior, there were some reports where Russia was claiming that the United States was actually giving information to Ukraine, which led to the death of a number of Russian generals. How do you see the U.S.'s role in this war with the revelation and the divulging of this recent information?
Of course, the U.S. is providing intelligence. The U.S. is actively taking part in this, and so the death of 12, I think it's 12 Russian generals, suggests pretty sophisticated intelligence, the sort that the U.S. Is capable of producing and that Ukraine is not capable of producing, I don't think. But the real issue here is that the U.S. Has provoked this conflict dating back to 2002, 2004, certainly since 2014. They have funneled billions and billions of dollars into Ukraine, untold amounts of weaponry and arms and training. There have been U.S. military advisors in country, in Ukraine, well before 2014, in fact. But certainly they have been flooded with U.S. military people since that coup in 2014. The U.S. sees and has long seen Russia and China as the major obstacles to what they see as their global supremacy, global hegemony. And that is their goal. It's their open stated goal. There are countless policy papers from think tanks, laying this out. And this goes back to 2001 when the neocons became a huge voice in foreign policy. I mean, the U.S. has always been imperialist, of course, but this is neocon thinking distilled down to a perfect event, which is the idea that they will provoke Russia into overextending itself, and General Ben Hodges of the U.S. Europe Command said the other day, we want to break the back of Russia. We want to bring Russia to its knees. This does not sound like anybody who's looking for a peaceful settlement, right? This is a war the U.S. not only wanted but provoked, and they've gone into overdrive with propaganda. It's incitement. They constantly claim, atrocities and war crimes and so forth on the part of Russia. If you talk to military people in the Pentagon, advisors, they will tell you off the record that they're actually very surprised at how cautious Russia has been. They have been, much more careful and slow in the implementation of this action, military action. And that's not what you read in the Western press, of course, which is just, a constant 24-hour-a-day stream of Russophobia. And we're seeing academics and celebrities and influencers and all these people caught up in this kind of war fever using extraordinary language, just amazing. And it is never reported that Putin went to the UN asking for peacekeepers in 2015, and I think again a Russian representative went to the UN in 2018 asking for help. Putin has till the very last minute was hoping there would be some recognition of Russian security concerns and the destabilizing effect of the regime in Kiev, the far right militias and extremists that pretty much run policy now. Zelensky listens to the Azov battalion more than the other way around. So the fact that the U.S. is providing intelligence is a foregone conclusion. I mean, of course they are, and they've been doing so long before this conflict actually broke out. So it's a frightening situation, of course, as we've spoken of before, because if the U.S. and NATO and all of the NATO countries are culpable in this too, of course, if they suffer, major setbacks in this, if Russia starts to achieve its objectives, even if those objectives are rather vague, the possibility for a false flag or more desperate action by the U.S., more provocation, more escalation,
Sure,
looms as a very real possibility.
Mr. Amspak, I'd like to get your thoughts as well on the role that the United States has been playing in this war. Mr. Stepping believes that the United States has been provoking this war since day one. Give us your thoughts, and also about the Pentagon's denial about helping Ukraine in the sinking of the Russian missile cruiser Moskva.
On the latter point, the Pentagon didn't say they weren't helping Ukraine. They just said they didn't tell the Ukrainians exactly where the ship was. Mm-hmm. In fact, the ex-CIA chief Clapper was on CNN this morning or last night, depending on where you are. He said, when a country's at war and we give intelligence to a country, we don't have to say attack this ship. We don't have to say attack these generals. If you tell the Ukrainians where all the headquarters are, and generals usually go to headquarters, and the Ukrainians attack the headquarters, you'll probably kill the generals. And so, that's the situation. This is a distinction really without a difference. Clearly, we are involved. We're also training people, and I think this is a very slippery slope. We always were training people, and then we had advisors for those of us who remember Vietnam. And then the advisors turn into other things. So I think this is a very dangerous slippery slope towards escalation, particularly if the Ukrainians suffer major defeats and the Russians say, okay, we're done here, we have what we want. I think at that point, the United States is going to not really want to end the war. And they're going to try to figure out what to do to maintain it. And that's a very, very dangerous situation. Politically speaking, in the United States, there is no major political figure in any party right now who is saying we should stop this war in Ukraine, with the possible exception of Tucker Carlson and people on the right. But even they, it's a different story. So I think that this is an extremely different and dangerous situation, leading in a real confrontation. As far as the other questions are concerned, clearly we're involved. We're spending billions. You couldn't have billions for childcare, but you get $33 billion for Ukraine in 20 minutes. So this is a long-standing position of the United States, and I agree with the other speaker. Since 1917, the United States has said Russia's an enemy, and now we're saying Russia and China are enemies. This is a bad situation for us, and I think bad for the world.
We'll stay with this gentleman as we're going to take a look at some online reactions to the news. The Sirius report writes that the claim is that U.S. intelligence helped Ukraine sink the Russian cruiser Moskva. Timing is everything, and it's intended to provoke Moscow into a response. If indeed the case, it will do so, but not how Washington expects, which is a serious miscalculation in the war. Think Deeper writes, what Ukraine-Russia war? This is a U.S.-Russia war, and the U.S. is too scared to face Russia, so they are sending Ukrainians to fight. Eric Erickson writes, we're going to come to regret the Biden administration's serial leaking of intelligence, boasting that the United States is the one responsible for all the Russians dying. And Jason Bazer writes, this is insane. It's the Biden administration trying to provoke Russia. They are basically admitting to directly helping attack Russian targets. And our last response, Annabelle V. writes, the Biden administration and Secretary Blinken are trying their best to provoke Russia. The U.S. had solid intelligence this war was coming. They knew they could prevent it with reasonable concessions, and now saying no to Ukraine, NATO, and chose not to. It's a proxy war, nothing more, nothing less. Some interesting reactions there. Let's go back to our guest, John Stepling. Do you think that with the, similar provocations, not just coming from the United States, but other NATO members, that this conflict has the potential to spread to other countries as well?
Well, sure. I mean, it has the potential for escalation in many ways, and certainly it could spread to Eastern Europe, into Poland, and Baltic countries. That's, I think, a distinct possibility. Look, remember that under Obama, the U.S. refurbished its nuclear arsenal to the tune of several $1 trillion. And you know, they have money for that, as your other guest said. They have money to send another $33 billion just last week to Ukraine. But domestically, the U.S. is suffering, you know, massive unemployment, a crumbling infrastructure. People are desperate. There's spikes in homelessness, and Biden's, you know, and Biden's approval rating, by the way, has fallen off a cliff. It's I think something like 70% of the American public sees him as doing a bad job. Well, of course they do, because they're broke and there's no relief on the horizon. People are really quite desperate, and this is just denied. If you watch the media, this kind of the reality on the streets of America is denied. And the same way that the reality of this conflict, of U.S. intentions, its desire for, you know, global supremacy, which is driving this, has driven these plans. The U.S. has had these plans for conflict in Ukraine as a way to destabilize Russia. They've had them for over a decade. This is not a secret. They write policy papers about it. So, and yet media is, you know, Western media is completely silent about it. And the UN ignored Russia's, you know, requests for help, because that's platformed in the U.S. on Rockefeller property in New York. The media is Western platformed. This is the reality. But you know, in Ukraine, we are seeing, as somebody said, the U.S. wants to fight this war to the last Ukrainian. They are cannon fodder for a very cynical political blueprint that the U.S. and its think tanks has had for, as I say, a decade.
Frank Hemsbach, your thoughts on the same issue? One of the reactions that we read out in our social media section said that Washington is seriously miscalculating some aspects in this war. Do you think that's the case as well? And also give us your perspective on any threats of an escalation of this conflict into other areas and other countries.
On the escalation, as I said before, there's obviously a threat. In terms of miscalculation, depends which side you're on. We'll see. Nancy Pelosi and others went to Ukraine and said, victory, victory, victory. And then, you know, what does victory mean? And who is going to decide? So if it's victory, meaning that every single inch of what used to be Ukraine will go back to Ukraine, including Crimea, there's not going to be a victory. There is no Russian government that can give up Crimea, the Crimea. It's simply not going to happen. So if that's our definition of victory, then this is going to be a war that goes on forever. If we can say, the United States can say, that if there's a ceasefire and the Russians hold on to, say, the Black Sea coast or something, and Ukraine survives and so forth, and that's a victory, well, that's something that everybody probably can live with. But right now, it does not appear that that's the United States position. Hence, the fight to every last Ukrainian has some merit. In terms of the other issues here, I think that one of the things that this war has done is it has stoked militarism throughout Western Europe for sure. You see it on the front page of the New York Times today, where Germany is putting in $100 billion or something in their defense business, a complete reshuffling of priorities. And that's happened here too, at a time when we should be going the exact opposite direction. So maybe the miscalculation is going to be of a different type. Not so much this geopolitical business about who's in charge in the world, because our position is we're in charge, and I don't think that's a viable position long time. But maybe the miscalculation is going to be what's happening to our country, and that we cannot afford to continue on the way we are here.
All right, thanks a lot, gentlemen. Author and commentator John Stepling joining us from Inderøy, Norway, and political commentator Frank M. Spack joining us from Madison. With that, it brings us to an end here on this edition of the News Review. But do stay tuned. There's plenty more to come here on Press TV.